Good evening, dear students. So today I have come with the part 3 of perks, which is the perks which will be partially taxable, meaning taxable for specified employees only. It's just an explanation, a little bit of explanation. I've already given you the study material. Please study from the study material thoroughly. Under this category, there are only 6 points. As you can see here, 6 points. So we'll discuss each of the points separately. Let's look at point 1, car or any other automotive conveyance. Point 1 has been further divided into part A, B and C. So first we'll look at part A. Part A is about those cars which are owned and hired by employer and the employer has given to the employee. So in that case, how to deal with it, we'll discuss. So in part A also, you have to make sure expenses, okay? If the expenses are being met by employer, then the first part, you look at this diagram, the first part will be for if the expenses are being met by the employer. And the second part of this diagram is when the expenses are being met by the employee. It might get a little confusing, but when we do the sums and all, it'll be clear, okay? But you try to understand with the help of this diagram. This diagram must not be looking very clear, so I will crop it down and first discuss one part and then second part. So now look at this diagram. So here you can see if the expenses are met by employer and if the employee is using only for official purpose, then it will not be termed as perquisite. So it will be nil. So it will not be taxable at all. But if the employee is using only for personal purpose, so no matter whether it's 1.6 liter or more than 1.6 liter, the value of the perquisite will be the actual amount incurred on running and maintenance plus chauffeur remuneration. Chauffeur means driver, okay? The amount you're paying to the employer is paying to the chauffeur, that plus 10% of the cost of asset, that is depreciation, actually 10% of the cost of asset minus any amount which employee is paying. This will be the value of the perk. Now let's look at this part, that is partially official, partially personal. That means the car, the vehicle is being used partially for official and partially for his own private work, okay? In that case, you have to check the capacity, the cubic capacity of the car. How big or how small is the car, okay? So as you can see there are two categories. The first one is 1.6 liter cubic capacity. The second is more than 1.6 liter. Okay, sometimes they say 1600 milliliter. Okay, so don't get confused, it's the same. So if the car is up to, means below 1.6 or up to 1.6, in that case, the value will be 1800 per month plus 900 for the driver's salary provided by the employer. In the question, if they mention up to 1.6 liter, this is how you calculate the value. And in the second case, if the car, the cubic capacity is more than 1.6 liter, so the amount will increase. It will be 2400 per month plus 900. The driver fees will remain the same, 900 per month. That's it. Now let's move on to the next part, which is vehicle owned by the employer, but expenses, maintenance and everything is done by the employee himself, okay? In that case, let's talk about personal purpose. If the employee is using that car for personal purpose, then simply the value of the perk will be only 10% of the cost of asset and nothing else, because expenses and everything he is paying. So that's why the value of the perk will only be 10% of the cost of the vehicle. Now let's move to the next part. That is when the vehicle is being used partially for his own work and partially for the work of the office. So in that case, just like the previous time, how you check the capacity, here also you have to check the capacity. But here the amount will be little lesser because expenses and all is being met by him. The employee is paying for the expenses and all. That's why the amount of the perk will be little less. So for up to 1.6 liter, it will be 600 plus 900. For a bigger capacity, engine capacity, that is more than 1.6, it will be 900 plus 900 if the driver is being paid by the employer. If there is no driver, then no need to include this 900 rupees. Okay, so that's it. We'll move on to part B now. So part B is about the car or the vehicle which is owned by the employee himself, not by the employer, not by the boss, but by the employee himself. Now this part is also again divided into two parts. So if the expenses are met by the employer, and second part if the expenses are met by the employee. Now let's look at both these sections separately. So here, if it's used for official purpose, again nil. But if it is used for personal purpose, then the value of the perquisite will be the actual amount spent by the employer on the maintenance and the running of the car, minus if any amount is recovered from the employee. Okay, same like before, same like part A. Now the next section, which is partially official and partly personal. If that is the case, you have to check the engine capacity. If the capacity is below or up to 1.6 liter, then actual amount spent by the employer minus 1,800 minus 900 for driver provided by the employer. But if it's more than 1.6, then instead of 18, you have to use 24. That means 2,400 minus 900 for driver, which is being provided by the employer. Coming to the next section. Now next section is the expenses being met by the employee. Now in this case, the car was owned by the employee and the expenses also met by the employee. So it's not a perquisite. So there's no perquisite value because it is completely owned by the employee, nothing to do with employer. So we are done with motor vehicles, motor cars. Now let's move on to 2, that is perquisite or free domestic servant. Here you have to remember that if the employer is providing free services of a sweeper or watchman or personal attendant or any other servant or helper, then in that case the value of the perk will be amount spent by the employer minus amount recovered from employee. If there's no amount recovered from employee, then no need to subtract this. Moving on to point 3, that is perquisite with respect of free gas supply, water supply and electric energy. So here also the value of the perk will be amount spent by employer minus amount recovered from the employee. Now let's move on to point 4, that is free educational facilities. Now point 4 also, you have to look into this in 2 different parts. The first part is, if suppose the educational facility is provided in some school and colleges and the employer is making the payment and reimbursement. If this is the case, the whole amount which the employee is paying as the fee or which the employer is reimbursing, those whole amount will be the value of the perquisite. Now number 2, if the educational institution where the employee children or any of the children from his household are studying, if that institution is owned by the employer, so in that case you have to look into 2 things. The first one is, if the cost of education in that locality of the similar kind of school does not exceed 1,000 per month, okay, 1,000 per month, in that case the value of the perk will be nil, okay, nil. But if the cost of education of similar type of school in that locality is more than 1,000, so in that case the value of the perk will be the amount, the cost to the employer minus 1,000. Okay. In the study material, I have discussed this very clearly, so you refer to that, you will understand.